world! It's Kyiv, not Kiev on the line. My name is Polina Bachuk, this is my fellow and my friend Tatiana Haiduk, and today we are having one of our very special episodes. The one when we are hosting an incredible guest to take a closer look at some questions through her eyes.
Yeah, we're really hosting a really exceptional guest. So please meet Emine Dzheppar, First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. Emine, pleasure to see you. It's both pleasure and honor to welcome you in Kyiv, not Kiev.
Dear ladies, pleasure is all mine, and I'm very honored to hear that I am a very special guest of yours.
You are.
So today we're gonna touch upon these topics.
I've been working in international communications for a couple of years now, and there is one problem I face every single time. Ukraine is terribly under-communicated in the world. We Ukrainians tend to think that the world is somehow Ukrainian-centric one, that everyone is supposed to know that Ukraine is suffering from Russian military aggression, or that Ukraine is incredibly rich in resources and worth investing, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, it's not always so. So my question is, what are the basic messages of Ukraine that you're using in your public communications on behalf of the state?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Probably some theses I want to stress upon. Communication of the state, official communication, shall never be out of the context of the political and social life. So probably as Ukrainians, you know that we are going through global reconstruction for 6 years. The revolution of dignity of 2014 has changed so many dimensions of our life, and actually every single dimension, whether it's a medical reform or education reform or decentralization or deregulation or the energy sphere reform and many more, are under this reconstruction. So of course it's always about not only making things but also communicating things. Ukraine never invested that much attention into communication previous years. I think that this is something that the whole world is about, you know. This is a new culture of making this communication better, more sophisticated. We're living in the world of short attention span. There is a huge competition between brands, among brands. States are also brands. So as far as whenever we speak about and talk about Ukraine, it's mostly about stereotypes, I do agree. So for us, it's essential to come up with new narratives. The main message that we are coming up with is that even though we are going through the war, we are going through the occupation, we keep on developing ourselves. So this is perhaps the biggest idea, is to show that Ukraine is a dynamic, modern European state. One of the biggest positive achievements that our state came up with is the adoption of the official brand of Ukraine a couple of years ago. The official brand Ukraine Now, which is supposed to show Ukraine as a dynamic, modern European state. Then the concept of popularization of Ukraine that comes up with many researchers on what are the stereotypes, what is the narrative behind. Then we also adopted 2 strategies on information reintegration of both Crimea and Donbass. This is something on how we deal with several target audiences, those Ukrainians who live under the occupation, those Ukrainians who still think, watching the Russian media, that we have a civil war or people tended to vote for the so-called referendum in Crimea. It's also about us to try to work with these audiences. And of course, the toughest probably and the most difficult dimension is the international audiences. As far as really the world does not spin around Ukraine, we have to find modern language, creative language on how to bring the narrative.
Mm-hmm. My question is, what is that image that Ukraine is to be associated with abroad? What is that word that Ukraine is to be associated abroad among various international audiences, among diplomats, politicians, investors, and just ordinary foreigners who live abroad?
Look, not only the war is the life of Ukraine. We still have investments, we still have startups, we still have a really great human capital. I think that probably the biggest and the most valuable resource in Ukraine are people. So I think that this is something, and we want to actually come up with the communication about Ukraine, speaking about people of Ukraine. Because indeed there are so many perceptions on what is Ukraine. The best way is actually to come to Ukraine and to see with own eyes, to hear with own ears, to taste it, to smell the country, to get in contact physically with people. So this is the best way, of course, to find out what Ukraine is, because I believe that after 2014 the world revealed Ukraine as the separate country from Russia, because I believe that beforehand mostly the stereotype was about Chernobyl and the part of Soviet Union. So of course the biggest and the most positive result is that the world perceives us separately from Russian Federation.
Mm-hmm. You are absolutely right saying that along with the shaping and the image of Ukraine, we have to counter the information wherefore from the Russia side that is struggling to ruin everything Ukrainians did to present themselves to the world. So what are the tools of countering Russian information war?
There are so many. So these are the tools of the soft power, and mostly it costs a lot of money. So whenever we speak about public diplomacy instruments, these are there are so many, like platform conferences, exhibitions, videos, and campaigns, information communication campaigns, films. I mean, many, like, you can invent so many instruments, what we do, but actually all these activities, they need resources. So I believe it's also about finding these resources within the country. It's not only about the TV channel, but it's also about the activity of the Ukrainian Institute, which is affiliated to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and there is a beautiful creative team today. It's over 40 Ukrainians, young, creative, those who know how to communicate the country. We just recently they presented the strategy of the institute that will cover the period for 5 years with the geographical coverage and what countries and what the regions are the priority to work with, what are the messages, how to use the public diplomacy instruments. So I also invite you to join the discussions that we have just launched within a couple of months on to inform the society what Ukrainian Institute is and how Ukrainian Institute together with MFA shall communicate the country. But also another important fact, another important narrative or narratives that unfortunately we have to deal with is not only about under-communicated state or the seeker state or the victim state, but mostly it's about corruption. So Russia has been trying to convince the whole world that that Ukraine is very corrupted, that it's a failed state, that there is no reason to invest money and resources because Ukraine would anyhow fail, that this is a fascist state, unfortunately. So these are probably the main narratives that we have to work with. So of course, by these instruments that I've been talking about, is important to show that we are not fascists. We are trying to protect our rights for our own identity. Even the language law that we recently had, we can see it's a litmus paper on how this inner political process and the need for our own identity may be misused by Russia. Every nation has a right to protect its own language, which is Ukrainian, not Russian. So I believe it's about communicating these very sensitive issues that has been misused by Russia by showing what is the real right of Ukraine behind.
Public diplomacy is about a whole range of actors and lines of communication, including diplomatic media communications, mass media, bloggers, opinion leaders, and etc. So my question is, how do you use these lines of communication on practice? Do you somehow focus on one of them, or do you try to use all of them while communicating all these things you've mentioned about Ukraine?
So formal and informal communication communication? If to say in short, what should be the focus of your attention? Equally divided, or maybe you prefer some of the tracks?
Actually, it's not possible to come up with certain percentage on how we should divide the formal or informal communication. It's always about the synergy of both, formal and informal communication. What is really important is a personal factor. What I see, taking part or participating in many international events or platforms or organizations or formal or informal events, it's quite not easier, but when I communicate what is going on in Crimea, and me being a person from Crimea, it always works different way. So of course the personal factor is quite important in terms of communication. There are so many beautiful Ukrainians in this governance system that physically deliver drastically different message on what Ukraine is. Not this, Soviet-style rigid, stony system of this inhabitant of Olympus, but a very normal person.
I would call that a humanization of Ukrainian politics, and it's one of my favorite trends now.
Yeah.
And what about the modern technologies? One more question about the public diplomacy and the digitalization is also one of the very popular trends in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, I suppose. But does it, in practice, does it simplify or vice versa complicate your life? I'm talking about that Twitter diplomacy. So
it simplifies a lot. Let me divide this question into two segments. Yeah, the personal. I had so many examples when by posting, let's say, the case when the map of Ukraine is being demonstrated without Crimea.
There was the case with Allo, right?
Allo and many more. There was an immediate reaction and it has been fixed. And then in terms of the MFA, of course, it also gives us an added value, an added source of, or the platform of communication, what is important for Ukraine. I mean, how much you know about the events in Africa, in North Africa, in Middle East. We almost know nothing. So what makes us think that the others should know more about Ukraine? So of course for us it's always about these additional instruments to communicate what is important, but also about digitalization. Look, we have the ministry on digitalization. Every single ministry within the government has the deputy minister on digitalization. This also actually demonstrates that this is the top priority agenda in the policy making of Ukraine.
Go digital or die.
Yeah.
Ukrainian authorities are blamed by civil society representatives for not having the strategy of how to return Crimea back. For example, the issues of occupied Donbass can be solved in the international venues like Normandy format or trilateral contact group. Crimea is refused to be discussed there by the Russians. I want to ask you if there is a strategy, because I know it is. I would like to ask, what is the strategy and for how many years is it designed?
Crimea is a personal pain of mine. I don't want to bleach out the whole system of governance and the government on their actions, because unfortunately dealing with the consequences of the occupation is not only about the MFA. It's about the whole system of the government, the cabinet of ministers, the Verkhovna Rada, the president,
presidential office and
everything,
his aides.
Everything. So I believe that it is about the combination of efforts of every single dimension of the governance. You are absolutely right saying that there is a certain platform that discusses the occupation of Donbass and the war of Donbass. In Donbass, there is no this formalized platform for Crimea, and this is exactly one of my big ideas and dreams, actually, to perform this platform. We finalized the concept of this platform within MFA. Now it goes through this discussion with the main stakeholders of the process, who are the Vice Prime Minister on reintegration of occupied territories, and of course it should be blessed by the President of Ukraine, yes. So after that we will start the political consultations and we will start the implementation process. Of course,
will it be somehow based on the Budapest format?
No, it's not.
So it's a broader format.
It's not about the Budapest memorandum. I cannot give you the details as it is not yet confirmed on the highest political level, but I promise you that probably in next interviews I would be able to speak and tell you more. But this is not about Budapest memorandum, this is about a wider range of issues, because what we believe that there is a bunch of consequences in humanitarian sphere, in security sphere. So mostly when we communicated the Crimean agenda, it used to be about the human rights violations, but it's not about human rights violations exclusively. It's mostly about security, and we believe that the Crimea is not a domestic problem of Ukraine. It actually concerns the wider range of Black Sea countries and Mediterranean countries, because it's about the food security, it's about militarization of Crimea, which has a direct impact to those countries who are neighboring, you know. So I believe that it's also an attempt to strengthen the international coordination in terms of this whole aspects of the consequences of the occupation.
Oh, I see.
Of course, I don't have any illusion that as soon as we declare this idea to shape a platform, the whole UN members, you know, country members would join this platform. No, of course, as far as we have so many factors that demonstrate double standards, that international world is the world of pragmatical attitude. Especially recently, the pandemic, the COVID actually made this huge shift from the global world to the inner problems. So what we see is that the world feels itself insecure. So we kind of countries tend to watch and to follow inner track rather than opening up the borders and kind of seeking this combination and globalization. So I believe it's also one of the challenges that we will have to deal with. So of course it's about finding the argument why the countries should join this platform. And the main argument for us is that this is not a domestic problem, it's about security of the higher and wider range of countries, but for Ukraine.
We are expecting and we are sure that our episode will be seen by the representatives of foreign missions in Ukraine. So my question is, in what directions do you or would you like to cooperate with the foreign representatives of foreign countries?
The main is that we are so open to cooperate. We are, and I am on behalf of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, on behalf of the whole team of the MFA, I'm very thankful for the bunch of embassies, foreign embassies and international organization representatives here in Ukraine for this readiness to cooperate, because again we feel this support on everyday basis. So I believe that all those projects that we will develop within many dimensions, including public diplomacy, including Crimea and Donbass, would be supported by the international community, by the diplomatic corpus here in Kiev, because otherwise I think it would not fly out.
What should viewers of Kyiv Not Kiev necessarily keep in mind after they see our conversation?
It's a very difficult question.
It is.
I believe that it's about the depth. As I told you, that living in the world of headlines, we sometimes don't have time for digging the truth, the core, the reason of the problem. And when we speak about Ukraine, it is so important to know the context. I think that to understand Ukraine better is always about knowing the context that we're living in. And the main context is about this Russian aggression. Unfortunately, it's not about me trying to show us as victims, but it is about this very objective reality. So Russia is the country that actually discredited itself many times in terms of this superpower perception. like a nuclear state that attacks the other sovereign country, but for securing the security and guaranteeing and assuring the security, attacks Ukraine, is also about not only Ukrainian way to find the response, but also the whole world to understand what we're living in and what we're going through. And this is also about the context, the historical context, the political context, the language context, so many questions, starting from Holodomor, ending up with the revolution of dignity and the occupation and the war in Donbass.
Thank you very much. It's all about depth.
It is.
We're gonna finish the interview up. Thank you for watching us today. These were Polina Kochuk, Tatiana Iduk, and our very special, incredible, and exceptional guest, Ms Emine Dzheppar.
Exactly. So we hope you will join us the next week and
dig deeper and stay calm.
stay kind and remember the most important thing: Kyiv, not Kiev.
From Ukraine with love.